Jim Diers is a renowned and internationally acclaimed expert on building engaged, connected, and caring communities. He has a passion for getting people engaged with their communities and in the decisions that affect their lives. Since moving to Seattle in 1976, he put that passion to work for a direct action neighborhood association, a community development corporation, a community foundation, and the nation's largest healthcare cooperative. In this episode, we'll learn a lot of lessons from his journey and discuss about his book as well. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm Asban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I'm bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hello, Jim. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you and how is it going?
Really well. Yeah, it's great to connect with you.
Same here. I'm so happy to see you, and I'm so happy to see your, your cheerful face and the vibe that coming from you. So I'm very looking forward to the questions I have for you and to learn from you as well. So let's begin. And this one is that you told me that you are very much focused on community building, and public spaces plays a role in it, definitely. So I want to know that how did you find your passion for community engagement and their empowerment? And it is very, prominent feature of placemaking. So I want to know about that.
I really started early on when I was still very young with a big focus on social justice and the environment and peace. As a high school student, as a college student, I was very active in the anti-war movement. I was very active in the environmental movement. Um, but then I got thinking, the only people in the streets, the only people protesting, the only people doing any action are people like myself, young, white. How are we going to, if it's just one part of the population? How do we get the larger community involved? And then I heard about community organizing. Community organizing in my country was really sort of codified by a man named Saul Alinsky, who came out of the labor movement in Chicago in the 1930s. And he said, there's really two kinds of power in our society. There's the power of money and there's the power of people. And if you don't have a lot of money, you better have a lot of people because that's how you make change. So he said, in the labor movement, we figured out how to get people organized so they can have power in the workplace, so they can have good working conditions, get a good income. But then they go back home to their neighborhood and they have no power at all. So we basically took the principles of labor organizing and said, let's apply those to neighborhoods and see if we can organize people at the neighborhood level. And he had some basic principles. One was if you want to get people engaged, you need to start where they're at. And by that, he meant several things. One is start in their neighborhoods. The closer you involve people to where they live, on their street, on their block, in their building, the more likely they are to get engaged. He also said, rather than start with your agenda, if that's peace or social justice or the environment, it's much better to start with the community's agenda, with what they care about. They're much more likely to get involved in something they care about than if you spend a lot of time trying to convince them to care about what you care about. He also said it's important to start small. People are feeling really powerless. And for people who are feeling powerless, they need to get some sense of that they can make a difference. So you need to start with small projects, small issues where people can see that their efforts are making a difference, that they're getting some results. And then they're more likely to move on to the bigger things. So so I took that to heart. And when I got out of college, I volunteered for 6 years as a community organizer in a very low income, multiracial community in Southeast Seattle, bringing people together around their issues. And I just loved it. I loved to see people come alive when they discovered community, when they discovered their power, and we made a real difference. These were communities that hadn't been listened to by City Hall. And we got City Hall to listen and to respond to the community and make some real significant changes in the community. So I just learned so much through that and got so inspired. And I've just kept up that community focus through the rest of my career.
That's beautiful, And I'm loving it also because after 5 years of being into this profession and into this career of placemaking, let's say, like from architecture to urban design to then community building, I have landed on it because I have realized over the time that people are not willing to own their communities, their places, and their own life choices unless they feel the power that they can do something. That empowerment is lacking over here. So I landed on this perspective and exactly the point that we need to start from the neighborhoods. And this is where we can empower people because this is where they can experiment and where they can most benefit from. So
That's
this
right.
is one of the reasons that I wanted to meet you and to learn from you. So let's talk about your book first. It's the name is Neighbor Power: Building Community in the Seattle Way. So what is the main points that you mention in it? If you want to quote any three prominent ones that we can work on the get go, the community experts who are learning from you right now, from this podcast, So if you talk about generally, it's up to you, or if you focus on Seattle neighborhoods, so we can quantify or qualify, okay, how we can learn from our own neighborhood context, if there is any guidance from you on this part, do share.
Um, I'd been doing grassroots organizing, working for the community, and then the mayor of and fighting City Hall. And then the mayor of our city asked me to head up a new department of neighborhoods for the city of Seattle. And I had to think about that because I wasn't had no ambitions to work in government. But I thought this could be a great opportunity to do community organizing citywide. But I thought I'm not going to be able to keep my job for very long if I just train people how to fight city government. Um, and at that time, there was great animosity between the city and community activists. Community activists saw local government as the enemy oftentimes, and local government saw community activists as a problem. And I thought that's no way to have a democracy where people see government as the problem and government sees active citizens as the problem. How do we make democracy work again? And so the idea became we really need to make three major shifts in local government if it's going to be a good partner with the community and make democracy work again. And the three shifts were first, to get out of the silos. That government, just like every other agency, is organized into silos with a laser-like focus on separate functions. So we had 40 different departments in city government, each focused on its own silo. So one for transportation, and one for youth, and one for human services, and one for housing, and one for the environment, and one for old people, and one for, it was crazy. And each agency, each department's trying to reach out and engage the community around its agenda. The community is being engaged to death. There aren't enough nights a year to go to all those meetings. And it's not the way the community experiences the place where they live. It's in our neighborhoods that everything comes together. There's a more holistic perspective. So if the city's going to work with neighborhoods, they need to, instead of forcing the community to organize in the way the government's organized, the government needs to be organized in the way the community is organized, by neighborhood, and look at whole neighborhoods rather than separate functions. In the same way, the community needs to make a shift, because oftentimes our communities, just like agency government is divided into silos, communities divided into factions. There's different interests within the neighborhood. It's not like there's one community. There are different religions, there's different ethnic groups, there are different politics, there are different incomes. People have different age groups. There's all kinds of differences in communities. And so if the community is going to be a good partner, they also need to cut across those factions and find ways to work together as one community. Find out what they have in common. And then it builds real power in the community, and it makes it worth city government's while to partner with the community, because it's not just a few people. It's not lots of different voices. It's one voice that they can deal with. The second major shift, I think, that needs to be made by both government and the community is to start to recognize that the community has incredible untapped resources. So oftentimes the government just comes in and just sees the community as a place with great needs. And in government, they see it as government's role to meet all those needs. And so the community is really not bringing any value. The community is just bringing a list of demands or a list of needs. If we started identifying the strengths that every community has, then there's all these resources to do much more and to do things government can't do so well. So there's real value in partnering. But that really requires a mind shift on the part of both government and the community, because the community is oftentimes has forgotten about its own strengths and is always looking outside the community for all the answers. Looking outside the community for government to respond, for NGOs to respond, and forgets about its own strengths. And then the third major shift is for government to step back. Instead of trying to do everything, and instead of creating barriers and red tape that makes it really difficult for communities to do anything, it needs to step back and make room for community. And in the same way, community needs to step up and take some responsibility. Instead of always blaming government or looking outside the community for all the answers, it's realizing there's some things they can do best and to take some responsibility for doing those things. So I think those are the three major shifts, and those apply not just to local government, but they apply to agencies of all kinds. By agencies, I mean organizations that are largely dependent on staff and budgets. So that is local government, but it's also schools, it's NGOs, it's all those organizations that sometimes think of themselves as a community, but they really aren't the community. They're staff. They aren't necessarily accountable to the community. And to really start focusing on the community itself and make sure it's really community led. There's big differences between agencies and community. Agencies, like I said, are totally dependent on staff and budgets, and communities are dependent on relationships. Agencies tend to be top down, whereas communities are more democratic or bottom up. Agencies tend to focus on people's needs. Communities focus on people's gifts. Agencies are one-way service delivery. Communities are all about mutual support, right? And you need both. I'm not putting the agencies down. Both are critical tools for meeting people's needs, but we need both. We need both agencies and community. And I think over time, we've had more and more professionals and agencies trying to do for communities what communities often have done better for themselves in the past. And the answer isn't having fewer agencies and fewer professionals. It's about having more community. But it's really tough to get the best of both. So we put several programs in place in Seattle with the Department of Neighborhoods to try to move in a direction of really creating real partnerships with the community. We created little city halls in neighborhoods where people could do business across all departments of the city in one place. So they could deal with one city government rather than 40 different departments, where we had neighborhood coordinators from the city whose job it was to help departments work with neighborhoods and help neighborhoods access the city across all departments. And also these coordinators' job, they were very neutral individuals, was to help bring those factions of the community together. People that everybody in the community could trust because they had no agenda. Their agenda was just to help bring people together to meet their own agenda. A second program we put in place was a program we called the Neighborhood Matching Fund. And this was really a way to incentivize communities to build on their own gifts, to build on their own resources. So we provide a cash match from local government in exchange for the community's equal match of volunteer labor in support of community-initiated projects. And through that, more than 5,000 projects got completed across the city of Seattle. People building playgrounds, people creating public art and murals, people creating cultural centers, people doing oral histories. And it just became a really great mechanism for really doing some very cool projects that would never come out of city government, but more importantly, for building community, for bringing people together and giving people a way to get involved from all walks of life, because we valued everybody's gifts, whether you're an architect or whether you're a construction worker, whether you just had some time, whether you're an artist. There was roles for everybody in these projects. And then a third program we put in place was a program of bottom-up neighborhood planning, where we actually gave money to neighborhoods to hire their own planner who was accountable to the community. But we would only do it if the whole community was engaged in the process. So it wasn't just the planner's plan, but it was the community's plan, all parts of the community. And through that, we involved 30,000 people in developing 37 bottom-up neighborhood plans with over 5,000 recommendations. And unlike the former plans that were just done by planners, that just sat on the shelf because there was no constituency for these plans were owned by the community. So they held government accountable for implementation, but equally important, they took a lot of responsibility for implementation themselves. So we just had so many projects come out of those neighborhood plans, reorienting the city's budget around what the community said was important rather than what departments said were important. Made a huge shift in the way communities related to city government. And I think those same lessons can be utilized by NGOs, by agencies of all types.
Awesome. Uh, you have actually put it all together in it feels like you have put together your whole journey of your work life. It feels like that. And yeah, I'm not very much concerned always about the dates and how the things happen. But for you, I wanted to know, like I wanted to interrupt in the middle that I had urged to ask you that what happened at what time of life, or in what year, like when you realize that government is working in silos and you started voicing about it, raising your voice about it. So what time of year it was, or what year it was, and then how slowly you shifted towards the other shifts happened, to know about the timeline and see how the process actually happened. Because listening to you is very hopeful, but when we start doing work or the underdeveloped countries or the places where there's no such thing, so it takes time, and usually we don't have the patience of creating these things. So learning about that, the timeline helps,
Sure,
that it
sure.
takes
Good question.
time. Thank you.
So yeah. So I talked about when I was a community activist in high school and in college. So I graduated from college in 1975, and then moved to Seattle in early 1976, and right away started doing community organizing. Did that for 6 years. And then got recruited to Group Health Cooperative, which was the largest healthcare cooperative in the United States. And it had grown to be such a large cooperative that it wasn't functioning very much like a cooperative anymore. It tended to be more like a business with the CEO and more top down. So pretty progressive board got elected, and they brought me and others in to help make it a cooperative again. So we started organizing members of the cooperative around the local medical centers, and where they could have a voice. And they sat down with the medical director and with the doctors to develop the budgets for the medical center. They reviewed the quality of care for the medical center, had real power. that was over their healthcare decisions, but also brought a lot to the table. So they would do classes as volunteers on health promotion, and really became health promotion advocates in their communities. We established special interest groups that worked on everything from senior concerns around health to lobbying our state legislature for a basic health plan so that low-income people could get medical care. And we were really able to start doing things that the cooperative couldn't do just with staff, because thousands of people, and help the CEO of the cooperative to understand that they were much stronger if they involved the members, not just as patients, but as members. So I learned a lot through that. Here I was working for the CEO, but organizing the members. And there was some tension there because the CEO wanted all the control. But to help the CEO understand that he'd have a lot more power if he shared the power. The power isn't finite. Power grows exponentially. The more it's like love. The more you share it, the more you get, right? So from that experience, I did that for 6 years, and then at the mayor to think maybe this is the guy who could run a new Department of Neighborhoods. So that was in 1987 that he asked me to run the new Department of Neighborhoods. I have no idea why he asked me, because my only contact with him had been as community organizer, and we had picketed his house. We at one point were so angry with him because he backed down on a campaign commitment that we delivered a live chicken to his office and released it in his office, and got it. And anyhow, he brought me in, and I realized I'm not going to be able to keep this job for very long if I just train people how to release live chickens in his office. So, so the idea became, how do we create more of a partnership? How do we make democracy work? So I did that work in the Department of Neighborhoods for 14 years. It didn't all happen the first day. You know, we started small. We started with a few little city halls and showed it could be successful, showed that it was actually cost effective, and we were able to grow it so that we had 13 little city halls all over the city. We started with a small neighborhood matching fund of $150,000. It was a 5-4 vote of our city council to approve that money, because they said, why should we give money to neighborhoods for their priorities? We don't have enough money for everything that's our priority. But finally, we convinced them to put up $150,000. The projects that we funded that first year were so successful that the next year they voted unanimously to increase the fund to $1.5 million. And they then increased it to $4.5 million. So, you know, we started just like in the neighborhood. We started small, but it grew. We experimented with neighborhood planning through the matching fund. There were some problems with some of them worked really well, some didn't work so well, but we learned from that. And then we used that to create the neighborhood planning program. So it didn't just start, you know, it started small and grew. And that's what I find tends to work in government. You can't change government overnight. Just like you can't change a neighborhood or a community overnight. You got to start small, show some wins, give credit away, look for the self-interest of the officials as well as the community,
Yes.
right? And look for ways to bring those together. So I did that for 14 years. And then in 2002, the new mayor fired me. In Seattle, the mayor serves as the CEO. The mayor is the city manager. The mayor is elected, but the mayor hires all his own department heads. So I survived. So usually each mayor brings in their own department head. I survived 3 mayors. I was the longest serving department head. But people were kind of shocked when I got fired by the 4th mayor. And there were big editorials, there were rallies, that people were upset. Um, but it turned out to be a great thing for me. We had more and more people coming to Seattle from all over the world to kind of learn what we were doing. And finally, somebody from Australia, city manager, said, Jim, this is a great opportunity. Now that you don't have a job, why don't you sit down and write your story? So you don't have to travel, so we can learn from it. So I sat down and wrote my book. And then I got more invitations than ever. So I started traveling and started working in 17 different countries, uh, sharing lessons I learned. But I think more importantly, learning from those countries, learning from local examples. Everywhere I go, I learn, I get inspired by what's happening around the world. And I bring those lessons back and share them with other communities. So it just kind of spreads the love, it spreads the knowledge. Um, I also used it as an opportunity to start teaching some classes at the University of Washington in community organizing, both in architecture and in social work. Was able to direct a community development corporation with a community foundation, but all kind of building on those same principles. Um, so yeah, sorry, that's sort of my timeline.
Awesome. And I'm so happy that the person asked that he fired you. The other person asked you to write your book, and the opportunities that came your way and you took them, and it became a very commendable journey. And I'm so happy about it, so inspired by it, and it's awesome, lovely. Okay, so like in this whole entire thing, you mentioned few points that were very important, very focused, that we need to learn from, we need to focus on. So I have a few questions that relates to them. Let's talk
Sure.
about them one by one. Okay, so how do you define a sustainable community? Because at one point I realized that community is actually about relationships. It's if there is no relationship and no trust among the people, then it's going to suffer. So how do you define that, and why is it important to focus on it?
I don't use the word sustainability too much just because it means so many different things to so many different people. It's become kind of jargon. But I think some of the keys for creating, I guess, a sustainable community are inclusive participation is one. I'll go through a list, but one is inclusive participation. There's all kinds of communities. There's communities of identity where people are organized around particular, maybe religion or around politics or around race or around culture or around gender, around interests. Um, but I think I'm passionate about place-based communities, about neighborhoods, because it's the only community I can think of that has the potential to involve diverse people. In our neighborhoods, we get diversity, whatever diversity looks like in a particular neighborhood. People with different ages, people with different genders, people with different incomes, with different interests, with different politics, different religions. And particularly here in the United States, I think we need that more than ever. We've become so um, uh, polarized. And a lot of it's because we don't know each other. People hang out with people who are like themselves. So a real challenge is how do we bring those diverse interests together in the neighborhood? Diverse people live in a neighborhood, but they tend to hang out with people who are like themselves. So so one of the challenges is bringing that diversity together, creating more diverse gathering places, bringing the different networks in the community together to focus on a common vision for the neighborhood. Um, a second thing that's, I think, critical for sustainable community is to have more shared leadership. So oftentimes we're just looking to one person as kind of the leader, or that person just thinks they're the only show in town and they're the best person to lead the community and are unwilling to kind of give up their own power. At the same time, they're critical of people in power in local government. They become like the people that they criticize. And or it might be a really well-meaning person, a really good person, a great leader. But if that person leaves, dies, gets burned out, gets sick, the whole thing falls apart. So it's really important to start thinking more about shared leadership, that no one person has all the gifts to be a good leader. Some people are good speakers, some are good listeners. We need a lot more of that. Some people are great musicians. Some people are great welcomers. Some people make great food that will get people to come. We need all those gifts to have good leadership. We need to keep rotating leadership, always bringing in young people, bringing in new people. That's absolutely critical to having a sustainable community. Um, I think other key pieces are building the local economy around the strengths of the people in the place, the local people in the local place, rather than always looking to outside inputs. That's not sustainable. Big corporation comes in, it could leave. The profits all leave the neighborhood. You build your economy around small businesses, around strengths of the people in the place. The money stays in the community, it grows within the community rather than leaving. It's about relying on community resources before looking outside the community for resources, so that you can get a lot more done and get it done more appropriately. It's about making sure you have lots of good public spaces and a good distribution of those spaces around the community as gathering places. It's about making sure the neighborhood is walkable. It's about limiting waste and reducing the carbon footprint and caring for the local environment. And it's about attention to keeping the neighborhood affordable. I tend to work in neighborhoods that are struggling, that we call low income or disadvantaged. And I try to always help people think that, as we make our neighborhood a better place, as we make it more livable, as we create these wonderful gathering places, it's going to become less affordable. The property values start going up. And some of the very people, the artists, the people who really made that place work, who helped make it change, can no longer afford to live there. So I always tell people early on, you need to think about strategies for how you're going to make sure that you keep this neighborhood affordable. How can the community buy land while it's still affordable? How can you create cooperatives? How can you create land trusts? Otherwise, it's not sustainable. You're creating a better neighborhood for somebody else, right? So those are some of the keys I've learned.
And these are so important keys, and I'm so happy that you have put them together, in points, so we can note them and we can just start on it, get on a get go. So these were so important, so helpful. So thank you so much, because the point that you said at the last, you know, uh, personally, I was thinking of um, posing it to the real estate owners or the community or the societies. We have societies here or the towns here that, invest in your public spaces, because it's going to raise the price of your property, and it will be, a very great marketing strategy for you. But the thing you mentioned, I would have missed it, because uh, to keep it affordable has to be the main thing. Otherwise, who will use it? Like, if people can't afford it, if they can't live it, then it will be a fancy place, not affordable for everyone, the low income people basically.
That's right.
So,
That's
uh,
right. And
so
it's not just about creating affordable housing, but it's also about making sure people are getting a living wage, making sure people are benefit as the neighborhood improves, as there's more construction opportunities, making sure local people are employed
exactly.
in doing that construction. It's about the education system. It's got to be a holistic approach.
Yes,
Yeah.
great. So, and what a holistic answer you have given, and I'm so overwhelmed and overjoyed by this thing, and I'm just happy about it. Thank you so much for sharing it.
I'm
Um,
just sharing what I learned from other people. So
so generous of you for
yeah,
sharing it.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so a very important point you mentioned in the about the book about the neighborhood development is that how do you talked about the asset-based approach, asset-based community development. So how do you describe it, and do you think that it is similar to place-led development?
asset-based community development really grew out of community organizing that I described earlier. John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann, two professors at Northwestern University in Chicago, had their start as community organizers. And so they came up with this model for what they call asset-based community development that really builds on community organizing. It still sticks to those principles about starting where people are at, about starting small, making sure it's community-led. But the big difference is instead of starting with what is wrong in the community, they organize around what is strong in the community. And here's the difference. In traditional community organizing, the organizer is always focusing on what are the community's needs? What are the problems in the community that we need to get government to fix? So they're always looking outside the community for all the answers. And I think that's important. It's important to hold government accountable. It's important to hold corporations accountable, absentee landlords accountable. Social justice is absolutely critical. And Alinsky-style community organizing is, I think, the best tool for addressing those social injustices. But with asset-based community development, you focus on what is strong. Instead of focusing on the needs of the community initially, you focus on the strengths of the community. And here are the key strengths. One is all the associations that are in the neighborhood. People tend to be organized into faith-based groups, into political groups, into hobby groups, into work groups, into women's groups, men's groups, the business groups. There's all kinds of formal and informal associations in every neighborhood. So that's a strength. A second strength is just the physical and natural environment of the place, including places that we often see as a problem. There could be potential assets, a closed storefront, a vacant lot. Instead of seeing it as a problem, see it as an opportunity. A third thing is the local economy. I talked a little bit about that before, but how do you build the economy around the strengths of the people in the place? A fourth thing is strength of every community is its history, its culture, its stories. And I think the most important resource in every community are the individuals themselves, the neighbors who make up that community. And to recognize that everybody, absolutely everybody in the neighborhood has gifts to give to the community. I like to think of them as three kinds of gifts. One is gifts of the head, that person's knowledge. Everybody's knowledgeable about something. Second gift is gifts of the heart, that person's passions. And everybody's passionate about something. And the third thing is gifts of the hands, that person's skills. And everybody has some skills. The problem in our society is that we have put labels on large sections of our community that label people not by their gifts, but by what they are missing. So we label people as poor, as disabled, as at risk. Just all these labels that homeless people that basically deny their gifts. And so it's about how do we lift off those, and if we just focus on people's what they're missing, they become clients in a service system. If we focus on people's gifts, they become part of our community, because community is all about sharing each other's gifts to meet each other's needs. That recognizing every one of us has needs, but every one of us also has gifts. And we need each other. We need each other's gifts to meet each other's needs. But in our society, over time, we've developed two classes of people. The class of people we think primarily with their gifts, and then the class of people we think primarily as people with needs. And if we really want to create an inclusive community and build on all our resources, we need to lift off those labels. In the same way, we've labeled whole neighborhoods as places that are low income, disadvantaged, And by doing so, we're always looking outside the community. We can't do a thing till we get our grant. We can't do a thing until we get some sympathetic government officials. With asset-based community development, you don't have to ask for permission. You can just act because you're moving with what you already have. So it's the key, for me, it's the key to community empowerment. And it's the way to get a lot more people engaged, because not everybody likes to get involved in protests or going to meetings, but everybody wants to be connected to community. And asset-based community development approach gives people a way to get all kinds of ways to get involved in their community. And then when you get a broader community participation, you got real power. So then when it comes time for the fight with local government or with corporation, or you got real power, you can make a difference. So those two kinds of organizing, I think, are very compatible. But too oftentimes we don't put the two together. I think you asked about sort of the relationship with kind of placemaking, and to me, an asset-based community development approach is really what we do with the placemaking movement. It's about creating great places, building on the resources of the community in ways that are community led. But one of the things I love about ABCD is it recognizes the community's power to do all kinds of things. That the community's power isn't limited to making great places. It's also about mutual support. Communities can provide a level of care that no agency could ever provide, right? It's about caring for one another. Communities play the key role, I think, in caring for the earth. You know, the whole environmental movement started bottom up. It was the Earth Day. It was people organizing. And I think if we're going to deal with climate change, people need to have a strong sense of community. It's like if you're just thinking of yourself as one individual, what difference does it make if I don't act responsibly? I'm just one person. And what difference can I make? But when we start banding together, we take more responsibility, there's more accountability, and we have real power to get the corporations and government to do the right thing. Crime prevention, much more appropriate for the community to prevent crime than for police officers. Police officers can enforce laws, but only communities can prevent crime, right? We spend way too many resources lining up the ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. Community's job is to build the fence at the top to help support people, keep young people from falling, you know, from getting in trouble, being supportive of them, responding to disaster, to emergencies. It's always communities are the first ones on the front lines. You know, there aren't enough agencies to respond. They can't respond quickly enough. When there's an earthquake, when there's a hurricane, any fires, we're totally dependent on community. Community is absolutely critical to strengthening our democracy. Community is absolutely critical to social justice. No major social change has ever happened top down. It all comes bottom up. So without strong communities, we can't make change. So, you know, I think ABCD is kind of the key to all everything I care about.
Lovely. We have started working on the communities, or to be precise, the neighborhood communities, building a community in a neighborhood and to bring forward their leadership in creating change. So we have just started doing it, and it's very so the ABCD concept is actually what should be implemented, but which we are going to focus on. So I was listening it very keenly to learn the lessons and to know where to focus on. So it was very helpful. Thank you so much for that. And also, the problem we face is that people are very reluctant in stepping up. Okay. So, like taking responsibility or taking the leadership uh, for any task or for anything. So I wanted to know that what were your challenges and through your journey of community engagement and how to make people the community engagement and empowerment. What were your challenges and what did you learn from it, and any lessons that you think can be helpful for me and other community experts as well?
Oh, I mean, I've talked about some of those already. I talked about how we had a hard time when I was trying to mobilize people. It didn't work, and so really listening to people is critical. So one of the keys that we have in community organizing and asset-based community development is what we call learning conversations. And just to sit down with your neighbors or with key leaders in the neighborhood, to sit down and have a conversation with them. And through the conversation, you're trying to identify the three things that will get people engaged. One is finding out what they really care most deeply about, not just what they have an opinion about, but what if the community worked on it, they would get engaged because they care about it so passionately. A second thing you're trying to learn through that is who else, what do they have to contribute to that? What kind of role would they like to play? What do they enjoy doing? Um, uh, and looking for how you use that broad range of gifts. So people, you aren't just assigning people a role, but they're doing something that they really love to do and contribute to the community. Third thing you're doing through that conversation is building a starting to build a relationship with that person. And that's so critical because people are much more likely to get involved if somebody they know asks them to get involved and contribute their gifts than if you just put a poster up on on a telephone pole or you put something up on social media. Uh, People don't respond to that. People respond to relationships. Um, so I think that's an important tool. So starting where people are at is really important. Starting small is important. Sharing stories is important to say, hey, they did, people just like yourselves did this over here. How about if we try something like that, right? Get people inspired. Um, I think another thing that's really important for a community organizer, a community builder, is what we call the iron rule of community organizing, which is never do for people what they can do for themselves. And it's the hardest rule for any of us to learn because we all do this work because we care passionately about community. But sometimes we're so eager to make things happen or we think we're the only ones who can do this. We can do it best. That we short circuit it and we take away the power of the community itself. So always, you know, moving at the speed of trust, at the speed of community is really important. Um, and to really tap those community gifts you do that through relationships. I think another really important lesson is have fun. That too oftentimes in our community work, we make it drudgery, particularly those of us who get paid to do community work. It's like we feel guilty if we're having fun doing the work. We aren't really earning our income. I'm certainly guilty of that. I have a lot of fun with this. Um, um, but to realize, and a lot of the community activists who sort of self-appointed community leaders are what we call those GD activists, the grim and determined, the people who are never happy, the people who are just kind of like to always be sour, who like to be negative. And they kind of keep everybody else away because most people gravitate towards positivity. It's like, why would you get involved if you don't think you can make a difference, right? Um, so it's about moving away from meetings. That too oftentimes all of our community work is meeting based, and that is absolutely worst way to get people involved in community. I've got a saying: why have a meeting when you can have a party? Think about it, right? The purpose isn't who can endure the most suffering. The purpose is to build relationships, and can't you do that a lot more through fun than you can through meetings? So why do we always resort to meetings as a way to try to bring people together? So it's I guess those are some of the key things I've learned. And also just kind of really trying to divide up some of those leadership roles so it's not a burden. So it's not like something you have to do 24/7. But that's why shared leadership is so important, where you're doing it as a team. Um, uh, and really that principle about, stepping back and never doing for people what they can do for themselves is so important. It's like the more we push it as community builders, the more we own it, and the more people step back. And so I often don't, and oftentimes we try to say, where are the worst conditions, or where's the biggest problems, and let's focus on that. Instead, it's important, I think, to focus on where's the opportunity. Where is it that there are people who are eager to get going, who want to start doing things? Let's go with that. And then that starts spreading. Then other people want to be part of it. They see it. So I think going with opportunity is also an important principle.
I'm so happy because, at this point in time, I was thinking about two things. There were two ideas. One was very exciting and very, very happening. It would have a good fun experience for people, but the chances were that I and my team would have to do it instead of the community. And the other one was very small and not very fancy, but the community can do it themselves. So I was thinking that what should we do? Like, should we give them a big thing or a small thing, and then we have try to have fun around it? And the thing you said just now is that don't do it if they can do it for themselves. So I found my answer and I was so happy about it during the time that you were saying it. And all these points were very important and very helpful. So thank you so much. I've learned a lot and I will try to implement all of these lessons as well. Thank you so much. Okay, so what you have
You
shared.
do.
Yeah.
You
So
are an inspiration to me. I appreciate what you're doing. That's what inspires me, is people in all corners of the world are doing this work. And you've been a real leader in your community. So thank you for what you do.
thank you so much for acknowledging it. It is just the beginning, but I'm very inspired. It is motivating to me what you have done and your journey. So I'm focused on starting. It's basically at the start. So I'm focused on continuing it because of you being my inspiration for this and motivation as well, because you have shared so much amazing lessons that it has been less overwhelming now. So thank you so much for your leadership as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so what you shared till now is also is like things you have learned or listened to people. So I want to listen to your personal story for this, that you have lived in Seattle. So any place attachment stories or anything that you loved about it on the personal level. So would you like to share that? Because I'd want to listen to that. I want to be the listener.
Level. Well, personally, in many ways, the pandemic was good for me. Um, I've been traveling all over the world, and the pandemic forced me to spend 3 years in my own community. And and it was an amazing experience. I saw how people came together to support each other in that pandemic. People forming mutual aid groups at the block street level to help people who couldn't get out of their homes to get medicine or to get groceries. People started up a campaign to get people to wear masks, but we couldn't find masks. So 65 people started sewing masks, and they delivered them to everybody in the neighborhood. Somebody offered to build a little free pantry, said, I've got a little free pantry in my yard so people can get food. And I'm going to build a little free pantry for other people who will do the same in their yards. She got 24 requests. She was overwhelmed, but other neighbors helped her to build those. And now she's got 120 little free pantries around the neighborhood that have spread. People came together to do volunteer testing for people. Artists came together to encourage people to wear masks. So somebody created a big mask for the front of their van to get people thinking about it, just kind of having fun with it. People dressed up as doctors and had big needles and stood at the intersection, encouraging people to get their vaccinations. Um, Musicians did concerts at night on the web, and so to keep people's spirits up for free concerts. Um, there was a guy with developmental disabilities, one of those labeled people, and he was trying to think, how can I help? And he decided he would start delivering flowers to people who were isolated in their homes and needed some cheering up. He delivered flowers to community people who were doing special things for other people in the pandemic, uh, and just bringing joy into their lives. So everybody kind of found a way to use their gifts to help each other through that crisis. And as a result, we had a very low rate of COVID compared to other communities. And it just, again, showed the power of community. But it became very personal to me.
Very sweet story. And yes, actually, pandemic had brought people together on emotional level and on compassionate level. And it has been observed throughout the world, across the globe. So such a heartwarming story. Thank you so much for sharing that. And okay, so by far the questions were focused on you, they were related to your work. I want to ask a few questions now that I ask everyone. It's sort of rapid fire, and we give the answers because, the person journey counts a lot. Because I have learned from people till now, 36 people till now, and we all have different stories, and it's so inspiring. So let's begin with that. I would like to ask that what keeps you focused on the work? What drives you?
The same thing that always has. I still care passionately about peace, social justice, and the environment. And now I also care deeply about community, and realize not just working towards a great future, but a great present. How do we live the kind of world we're trying to create? It's so oftentimes we're just so focused on making change that we forget about sort of how we're living day to day. And I think it's so important to reflect on that, to have people experience the kind of world we're trying to create. So thinking about how do we build all that into our community work, and how do we make it a labor of love. And what keeps me going are people like you. Just when I travel around, and it just everywhere I go, I hear these fantastic stories about people building community. I feel so privileged. I've made a living off of this work. Most people do it for free. They do it just because they're community members. I do a lot of that too, but it's really humbling to me, and it's so inspiring. It's what gives me hope for the future. And I guess I've also been really fortunate to be able to travel and see this happening all over the place. So that's why I feel some responsibility to share those stories and to share what I'm learning, because I want to inspire other people in the same way that I've been inspired.
That's very generous of you and so sweet. Thank you. Okay, what would you like to share any proudest moment of your work life that brings you joy every time you recall it?
Uh, where it start is I I get joy every day. I just because there's good things happening all the time. There's real problems, real crises in our world, but there's also really great things. And I try to focus on what's working, what's, uh, you know, one story in my book well, there's so many. We started out this matching fund. We had just at the beginning, that first year, We had one woman in one of our neighborhoods in Seattle, the Ballard neighborhood, and it was the neighborhood of Seattle that had the least number of street trees of any neighborhood in the city and the least number of parks. There was one woman, Dervilla Gowan, who cared passionately about trees. She wanted to see trees up and down the streets of her neighborhood. So she put notices in the local newspaper. She put them on social media. She put them in the church bulletin. She put up posters around the neighborhood, advertising for other people who shared her passion for street trees. And she tried to find somebody at every block of that neighborhood who shared her passion for street trees. And if nobody came forward from that block, she'd go and knock on every door on that block till she found somebody who shared her passion for trees. And then she trained that person about how to plant, take care of the trees, and she got them to recruit their neighbors to do the same thing. So she got them to all sign pledge forms saying they would be involved in this project, and they applied to our neighborhood matching fund. And we provided the money to buy the trees, and we delivered them to the neighborhood. And the neighborhood's match was to plant the trees. So one day, trucks pulled into our neighborhood with 1,080 trees, and they dropped them off at every block in Ballard. And Dervilla knocked on the door of the block captain and said, "The trees are here." Block captain knocked on the neighbors' doors. That day, over 1,000 people came out and planted trees up and down the streets of Ballard. People felt really empowered. Beginning of the day, there's no street trees. The end of the day, they had tree-lined streets. Look what we can do when we work together as a community. Well, then they said, we still have the least number of parks. So they went around the neighborhood looking for potential park sites. They found this old rundown vacant lot that was right next to the business district. It was a public safety problem. It's where people were doing drugs, hanging out. They said, let's turn this into a park. So they renationalized it with native plants and became this wonderful gathering space in the neighborhood. They went on, and over the next 20 years, they built 20 parks in 20 years, all with volunteers, all with the community. And then they said, we've made our neighborhood a much better, they created salmon estuaries. They created skate parks for the kids. They created playgrounds. They created more parks. After they took out the asphalt around the school and they made it a graded green project so the water could percolate through the soil. All kinds of cool, innovative projects. Finally, they said, we've made our neighborhood a much better place, but we're concerned about what's happening to the planet. We're concerned about climate change. So they organized an all-volunteer group called Sustainable Ballard. And every summer they had a Sustainable Ballard Fest. And they had music and food to bring people into the park. And then they had booths to educate neighbors about what they could do to reduce their carbon footprint. And the first booth you go to is the undriver's license station, where you check all the ways you will not drive over the next month. I'm going to walk, I'm going to bicycle, I'm going to take transit. And if you check ways you won't drive, you get an undriver's license, which entitles you to drive the shuttle bus. And it's this vehicle that's just pedaled by feet, where people are just, in this structure that looks like a bus, but it's just run by people by feet. Has like 6 or 8 people, and it's walking down this middle of the street, and it gets everybody's attention and gets people thinking, what could I do to get out of my car? What could I do to reduce my carbon footprint? We'll create a movement. Other neighborhoods around Ballard started up their own all-volunteer sustainability groups. There were 67 of these organizations, all volunteer, working towards a more sustainable planet, a more sustainable future. And part of the reason it inspires me is because it illustrates, I think, what can happen. That I talked about, you never get people involved in climate change as the first step. The first step here was to plant street trees and give people a sense of their power. And then they moved up and started building parks. And then they started doing climate change, 20 years later. It doesn't happen overnight. But we need to get started. We need to get people started at the community level, or we're never going to be able to respond to the challenges of climate change.
Awesome. Such an inspiring one. You know, the actual how gradual change happened, and it's it was so inspiring, and I loved I loved how one lady created something huge, a very inspiring story, you know, a movement basically. And I'm so happy that you remembered her name. You know, like
And it wasn't, you know, and it wasn't me, right? I had, and we
you were just
provide
supporting her.
this mechanism, this fund, this matching fund, but it was entirely the community's show. It was entirely, all volunteer. I went out to, cut the ribbon for some of the parks, but uh, it wasn't mine. It
It's
was
a
it was
sheer
the
pride.
community's.
It's a sheer
Yeah, yeah.
pride, you know, and it's not related to me or my community, but I'm feeling proud of it as well, like as a human, because it's a emotional connection to it, a mental connection to it. It's inspiring to me, so it's a shared pride, proud
Oh,
moment. Lovely. Okay, so I think this is the most difficult question for you because as much I've seen you doing it, you see opportunity everywhere, you don't see the problem. So I want to ask you that think about it and share that is was there any hardest moment that you actually saw it as a hard moment and you struggled about it and then you learned from it? Because we need to feel the pain sometimes.
well, I think we learned all along the way. Just, not everything goes right, and it's important to reflect, to look at it and see how can I always think about how could things be better. I think I mentioned it quickly before, but when we experimented with bottom up neighborhood planning, that was a huge shift for the city of Seattle and for the neighborhoods. And a lot of neighborhoods said, it's great that we're able to do these projects, to build parks and to create public art. But if you really wanted to give us power, you give us the power to plan. So we said, okay, let's make that an eligible purpose of the neighborhood matching fund. And so we funded some plans through that and had some very good success. The neighborhood I lived in, where the business district was totally boarded up, got totally revitalized through bottom up action out of that neighborhood plan. We were able to get a school opened at night for community use because there were all these great facilities. Again, schools are siloed just like every other agency, and they're just used to educate young people. We opened up our schools so that the gymnasium could be used by the community, so that the computers could be used by the community, so that we could teach classes to each other for free at night around our skills, where we could support young people with their homework, where we tore up the asphalt around the school to make a community garden. So really making the school a community resource. So all kinds of great things happened out of that, out of some of those neighborhood plans. But there was one neighborhood that worked really hard on their plan, tried to bring people together, but the business community never got involved. They kept inviting them, but they never came to the table. So after a couple of years of work, they finally presented their plan to the city council because the city council had to adopt the plan in order for the city to take action on it. And then the business group showed up and said, we weren't involved. This isn't our plan. In fact, we're opposed to it. And it just torpedoed the plan. Nothing happened. So learned a lesson from that and said, it's not enough to just kind of reach out to the business and say we tried. We really need to make sure everybody's bought in before we do a plan, and that all parts of the community are involved in helping to create the vision, so that there's broad community ownership of the plan. And it's also important to have some of the people from city government in on the planning, because they have some expertise that they could share. They know what the budgets are like. They know what the constraints are. Not that we necessarily have to respond to those constraints, but at least we need to know what some of the red tape that we might have to deal with. Um, and so we came up with a whole new neighborhood planning program that said, we'll give you money to plan, but first you need to bring all the whole community together. And it's not just enough to have some token individuals from those different parts of the community. You need to then have a plan for how you're going to engage the whole community, not just those few individuals. And that turned out to be very successful. But we couldn't have started there. We had to start small and learn from it, and then change. So it's
Yeah,
yeah.
it must be a very frustrating time at that time. So, was there any low moment for your own self? Because I have multiple of them. So, what is your self-talk during that time?
Well, no, like I said, there's always great stuff going on. So, we had 5,000 projects. So I could point to all kinds of things that we're working. So that's kind of what keeps you going, right? It's uh and that's part of why I also think it's important. So many times people are just organized around a single issue or around a single um, theme. And it's important to really diversify so that you have lots of things going on. If it's just one thing and it fails, you just, where do you go from there,
Yeah.
right? Um, so it's moving on lots of different fronts. I think is important.
Yes, and I agree to that. It's a major lesson.
Yeah,
Definitely, yeah. If we are fixated on one thing, then we will actually lose hope. It happens. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Great.
And also just to have fun along the way, right? So that it's not all about what's the final result, but it's
Mhm.
about community.
Yes,
It's
yes.
about supporting each other through that. We build relationships, and through those relationships, there's lots of things that happen. It's not just that project. It's about supporting somebody who's ill, somebody who needs support, somebody who just needs a friend. Um, uh, yeah. So
Exactly.
the goal isn't to get a project done. The goal is to build a community.
Exactly. Actually building the relationships. It's that, you
Yeah,
know?
that's right. That's right.
Yes. Because that brings joy and the
Yeah,
fulfillment of the heart, basically.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Do you have any mantra that you remembers every time you start your work or you do your work?
Oh,
Any favorite quote? Maybe that inspires.
apart from what I've said, one term, since, talking some about placemaking, one term I like to use is creating bumping places. I like to use that because to me, community is all about relationships. We've talked about that. And you build relationships by bumping into the same people over and over and over again. So if you want to build community, you need places to bump into other people. And the closer those bumping places are to where you live, the more likely you are to bump into the same people over and over and over again. So, you need that community garden, you need that basketball court, you need the coffee shop, you need the pub, you need just all those places where the bus stop, the places where you can bump into other people. And the best bumping places are the ones that are created by the community itself, because then it responds to their needs, what's important to them. It reflects their culture, it reflects their interests. They can identify with it. It provides more identity to the neighborhood itself. People are much more likely to utilize it. People are much more likely to take care of it and keep it from being vandalized and keep it up. Um, uh, and I think one of the challenges with bumping places is that oftentimes our bumping places become just one kind of people tends to hang out. We have a place where young people bump, a place where older people bump. And part of what I love about, I saw you interviewed Fred Kent, but Project for Public Spaces. I love that they talk about the power of 10 and that you should have at least 10 things happening in each of those bumping places so that it not only programmed all the time and there's activity all the time, but it brings people from different walks of life together. That's part of the key to create a more inclusive community is having places where people feel comfortable interacting with one another.
Nice. And yes, this is totally it's actually it's not something small that you have said, you know, bumping places, but it's just two words, but it is a huge thing. And you ended you ended it on that note, that power of 10 plus. It's not something small, it's actually a big thing with a great impact, but it always starts small. That's true. Thank you so much. And okay, do you have any opinion about Pakistan? Do you know anything about it, or you want to share about it? You want to
I
learn about
don't.
it?
It's one country I haven't been to. I've done some work in India. I've done some work in China. Um, but every country is different, and even within each country, in the United States, every place is different. The city's different than rural. Every place is different. But what I've learned is that every place is more the same than it's different. So the principles I've learned apply everywhere. People everywhere thirst for community. Community is critical is the solution to problems everywhere. And agencies are the same absolutely everywhere. Everyone is top down, everyone is um, uh, focused on the needs of the community, everyone is siloed. And so the lessons that I've learned apply universally, right? Context is different, culture is different. We need to build on what's unique about each place, but the principles are the same about having fun, about starting where people are at, about never do for people what they can do for themselves. Applies absolutely everywhere.
Yes, human nature is same everywhere. Yep. Human
Yeah,
beings,
yeah.
but
I remember when I was doing some work in India, I was doing some work with public health workers
yeah.
and on community engagement, and they said, how do we engage the community? They don't care about public health. I said, what do you mean they don't care about public health? And they said, well, they're so focused on like hunger and how to get food that they don't come to our clinics to get for the inoculations.
Yeah.
And I said, well, why aren't you working on hunger? If that's what the community is focused on, that seems like a public health issue to me.
Yeah.
And they said, but that's not what we get paid to do. you
Yes.
know and so somehow it's tough, it's hard, but how do we break out of that agency and really do what we people are in those agencies because they care deeply about community, but oftentimes they're stuck in this bureaucracy that doesn't allow them to really do the work that they want to do. So I saw that as part of my role in Department of Neighborhoods is how do you help bureaucrats break out to do what they've always wanted to do, which is, work collaborative with communities, not go out and feel like they're the enemy of community or being criticized all the time, but how do community welcome them because they're real allies, they're real, they're
Mhm.
working together. And it's not easy, it's hard. It's because that's the way agencies are organized. But I found it is possible to break out. So look, we call them the gappers, the people who work in between the agency and the community, the people who can help make those connections.
Yes, and you know, I feel like answering it somehow that um if people concern is hunger and their concern is public health, you know, food and public health is connected. Like we say that if you eat healthy, then you don't need to use the hospitals. Let's say that only, you know,
That's right.
these things are connected. If we
Right.
work in silos, then we are going to complain. But if we work um, in a cooperation or in collaboration with each other, we get to share our perspective and our passion towards well-being in our own ways. And this is how it's supposed to work.
And communities can help agencies break out of those silos because communities think holistically. So when we did neighborhood plans, one of the best things about the plans was they just didn't plan around silos. We
Yes.
had a neighborhood that said we want to have a library in our community. It's low income community. We want access to a library. And because they involved so many people in the planning process, they had an army that could go to City Hall, demand a library, and they got funding. But before the city even had a chance to design it, the community came together and designed the library themselves and said, we want a library with affordable housing up above it so that as our neighborhood gets better, people can, and so that low income people and kids can have access to a library. Bill Gates doesn't have that big a library in his house. These guys just go downstairs, they have this big library. That never would have come out of our city government because our library department just builds libraries and our housing department just built housing. They created this wonderful, and we see that over and over again, these wonderful solutions that start requiring departments to work together, to start working as one city government rather than lots of different departments. And that was only possible because we empowered the community. And then the community then helps government get out of its silos.
Yes, and this is, I would highlight one thing that you mentioned here is that the library, the department who is responsible for the library will build libraries. The department responsible for the housing will build housing, but the one who worked together built one unit which was being used for multi purposes. And this is actually something that we need to focus on and to learn from. And I would like to here add one thing that we did recently was that while working with an orphanage and while trying to engage the community, their neighborhood, to help support them in raising children because it's very emotionally overwhelming and they need their security in the neighborhood. So the neighbors have to support them. One thing, one idea that helped me do it was suggesting them to build a library which is open to the children of the neighborhood as well. Because it was an
Right.
organization, it was a public place, people visit
Yep.
and they learn from it. It will help the children to come out of that bias of being an orphan and just be
Yep.
treated like a simple or a normal human being. And it worked. And there's
That's great.
socialization
That's good.
happening. So
Congratulations. That's
thank
great.
you so much. So,
That's a great story.
yes,
Yeah.
because I was
You know,
able to learn it over the time.
yeah.
Being an
I
architect,
was,
yeah, being
yeah,
an architect, I went to that place to uplift their environment and paint their walls. Then
yeah,
it shifted to bringing, the environment, and then it shifted to programs and to the community. And it's the same community that I'm
great.
working on this year. The one with,
That's excellent.
yeah,
I was in Rotterdam, and they told me this story, and they said Rotterdam city government had do lots of budget cuts, so they were going to close down their local library, and the community organized to fight that cut to keep their library open, and they were working on it. And finally, somebody said, rather than put all our time into trying to keep our library open, our library's not that great. Let's just start up our own library. So they took a storefront and people donated their books and they made it a library that has a cafe, it's got a pub, it's got a boxing gym, it's got a stage for music, it's got a children's play area, and it's just a place for community. Again, much more holistic vision, right? And the community owns it. It's all volunteer run. It's a place where they build community. Our libraries, I find, are some of the places that bring the most diverse people together. In our local library, we get kids, we get older people, we get business people, we get homeless people, all in that library, but they don't interact, right? Because we have to be quiet. We have to sit down and read it. Uh, this library in Rotterdam, people were interacting, people from all walks of life building community. Yeah, a lot we can do, and community takes the lead.
exactly. This is, another inspiring story. So happy about it. Okay, so lastly, I would ask that is there any message that you would tell the young professionals who are joining in, or the community experts or community leaders or the citizens?
I think the only thing I would say is I can't think of any more important work right now than community building. I really think strong communities are the key to everything we care about. And we've got, as much as I like to be optimistic, we have really serious crises in our world right now. climate change and global warming, increasing inequality, very rich and the very poor. We've got, increasing issues around disease, the pandemic, um, increasing violence and war. And so I really think there's nothing more and an epidemic of loneliness. And community is the key to all those things. So I know this work isn't easy, and we often, have a hard time. But I think it's important for people to know that the work they're doing and oftentimes we're doing our work and we're doing, like I said, starting small. We're just working on a small thing. What difference am I making when there's huge problems facing our society, more authoritarian governments, losing democracy? It's kind of overwhelming. But what gives me hope is that this is happening everywhere. People are building community absolutely everywhere. So I think it's more urgent now than ever. And I also think it's important to always think about how do we link that very local with the more global, to get, while we're working very locally, to also get people to think about the larger issues and kind of like they did in Ballard. We're planting street trees, but we're also thinking about what's our impact on climate change. So always making those connections. I think local is the place to start, but we can't ignore what's happening globally. And and have fun. If you aren't having fun with this, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
If you're not having fun, who's going to want to join you, right?
Exactly. And
So
it becomes overwhelming for our own self because it's a very responsible thing to do. So if we are
yeah,
not having fun, it becomes overwhelming.
and I think the other thing is, particularly for community builders who do this as for a living, is that this isn't just good for somebody else. It's something we need to do for ourselves. If we aren't experiencing community, we can't really build community,
Exactly.
right? Um, and that's how we also learn that it's not easy, but we can really relate to the people with whom we are working.
Yes, it's worthy. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And it was such a wholesome conversation. I loved talking to you. It was commendable, the work you have done and the way you have shared, and the way you have shared from the depth of your heart. Like it's your compassionate soul, basically, that I was really deeply touched by. Thank you so much for your great work. I look forward to learning from you in the future as well.
Look forward to learning more from you. And I'm excited about what you're doing, and please stay in touch, okay? And
Definitely.
keep it up. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much. I really
Okay.
appreciate it. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.